"He's my son," Marilyn said softly, her voice calm in the courtroom. "But I no longer trust him with my name, my body, or my legacy." David shot to his feet. "She's not well. She's punishing me." The judge didn't even look up. Petition denied. That day, a mother legally severed what biology once wrote in ink, and her son finally understood. This wasn't abandonment. It was a boundary. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from? The jazz trio played with soft restraint, as if the clarinet could sense the tension humming beneath Marilyn's pressed linen smile. Her house was warm with bodies and music, filled with laughter from the friends who had carried her through the years like well-worn sheet music. But at the head of the table beside her, a single chair remained painfully unoccupied, place card pristine, untouched fork resting beside a folded napkin. "David?" someone whispered behind her shoulder. Marilyn didn't answer. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Courtney's photoshoot ran late. Can't make it. We'll make it up to you next weekend. Promise. No punctuation. No apology. Just enough detachment to sting like citrus in a paper cut." She looked up, blinking slow, and fixed her gaze on the flickering candles. 70. They danced in uneven tempo, casting shadows across the cake's buttercream edges. Her hand hovered at her lap, fingers tracing the invisible keys of memory. Childhood breakfasts, scraped knees, music lessons, and the first time David had played Autumn Leaves without missing a note. "Make a wish, Marilyn," someone called cheerfully. She stood, inhaled, and exhaled with such grace that no one noticed her chest tighten. No one but Mr. Gilmore. The retired librarian, who'd lived next door since before David was born, raised his glass with a crooked smile. "To showing up," he said, voice a little raspier now but clear. "Not just in person, in spirit." Glasses clinked. Marilyn lifted hers, cool stem trembling slightly between her fingers. "To presence over promises," she said, and let the words linger in the air like incense. After the cake was cut and the final notes of Take 5 trailed off, Marilyn stood at the sink, rinsing plates while the rest trickled out with hugs and "we'll talk soons." Her fingertips scrubbed more than ceramic. They scraped over something invisible, just under her skin, a buried expectation she hadn't known she still carried. The place card with David's name lay near the centerpiece. She picked it up, thumbed the edge, then placed it in the drawer beneath the coffee filters. When the door closed behind the last guest, silence stretched wide across the house. She walked slowly to her study, the one David had once begged her to turn into a movie room. Light from the hallway spilled across her desk, catching the worn leather folder that held her estate papers. She opened it. David Fletcher, listed as sole beneficiary, executor, emergency contact. Every legal tether still bound her to the boy who didn't come. She stared at the page like it was a puzzle suddenly missing half the pieces. The door creaked behind her. Just the wind, or the house shifting its weight. She whispered to no one, "Next year I'll throw a different kind of party." Outside, the wind rustled through the dogwoods, and a cat yowled somewhere in the alley. The world was already moving on. Marilyn leaned back in her chair, the folder still open in front of her. She didn't reach for a pen. Not yet. She closed the folder slowly, deliberately, but she didn't put it away. Instead, she left it right there on the desk, angled just so that the name would be the first thing she saw in the morning. David Fletcher. So much given, so little returned. The morning after her birthday, Marilyn sat in her breakfast nook with a chipped porcelain mug, staring at the steam rising from her coffee like it held answers. The house was quieter than usual, not the cozy hush of peace, but the aching silence of being unseen. A jazz record played faintly in the background, the same one she used to dance to with David when he was still small enough to stand on her toes. The sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, brushing against the bookshelf that still held his middle school spelling bee trophy. She hadn't dusted it in months, now she didn't want to. She reached into the drawer below the piano bench and pulled out the old ledger. The cover was cracked leather, worn from years of lesson notes and tuition tallies. On page 61, her pen had once carefully printed David Fletcher, First lesson, April 14th, age 6. She'd added a star beside it, then a second one the year he played Summertime at the recital in the Baptist church downtown. Today, with steady fingers, she drew a neat line through his name. Her phone buzzed on the table. A notification. Courtney Fletcher Life posted a new reel. Wife, Muse. Icon. The screen filled with sunlit angles of Courtney posing beside a vintage car in what appeared to be designer loungewear. Caption, "We create our own moments. Goddess energy. No ordinary life. No mention of Marilyn. Not even a generic celebrating family tag." She took a sip of coffee, let the bitterness sit on her tongue, then swallowed. It was nothing she hadn't tasted before. "Unbelievable," Beverly muttered from the armchair across the room. Marilyn's oldest friend, silver curls tucked into a satin headband, had shown up that morning with bagels and fire. "You built that boy from the ground up. Now he can't be bothered to show up unless there's a camera flashing?" Marilyn didn't flinch. "Sometimes," she said calmly, "what you build forgets who laid the bricks." They sat in silence a while, the kind that doesn't beg to be filled, only acknowledged. After Beverly left, Marilyn moved to the upright desk in her sunroom and opened her laptop. She typed slowly but with certainty. 2. Christopher Lane, attorney at law subject, estate planning, urgent review. Dear Chris, I'd like to discuss revising my estate documents. Please schedule a time at your earliest convenience. Best, Marilyn Fletcher. She hit send, then leaned back and let the afternoon light wash over her. Her fingers tapped against the desk like ghost notes on a forgotten melody. The next drawer down held old greeting cards, mostly from David. She flipped through them, handwritten when he was little, store-bought and impersonal by his late 20s. The last one was 3 years ago. "Thanks for always being there, Mom." No signature, just a printed name. She slid it back in without a word. Outside, the breeze pushed the wind chimes into an uneasy harmony. Marilyn stood, walked to the garden window, and paused. The backyard. Her sanctuary, where she'd once planted tulips and wept into the soil after her husband died. The space where David had played tag with neighbors under string lights on his 10th birthday, where the grass had grown around grief until it became green again, and now it was being prepped. Her phone pinged with a new event alert. Influencer brunch, beauty, bubbles, and bravado, hosted by at Courtney Fletcher Life. Location, private garden, Asheville, North Carolina. Marilyn blinked once, twice, her jaw set, fingers curling lightly at her side. The moment she turned onto her street, Marilyn noticed the shimmer of white through the trees. It wasn't snow, it was worse. Rows of folding chairs, ivory with pale pink bows, stretched across her backyard like teeth in a too-perfect smile. A crystal champagne tower caught the late sun, sending shards of light onto her back porch. From the driveway, Marilyn could hear laughter. Fake, rehearsed, social media-ready laughter. She didn't park in the garage. Instead, she turned off the engine and sat still for a moment, letting the classical station on the radio finish a cello solo. When the piece ended, she stepped out slowly, her heels clicking against the stone path that she and her late husband had laid with their own hands one fall decades ago. She remembered how he joked about the grout being too stubborn, just like her. From her back porch, Courtney twirled in a blush silk dress, her arm looped through a ring light. "Marilyn," she chirped, "hope you don't mind. We needed a little space for a content shoot. Garden was perfect." Marilyn said nothing. She looked past her to the flower bed where her mother's rosebush had once bloomed. It had been dug out. A new arrangement of faux succulents now sat in its place, laid in some influencer aesthetic, symmetrical and dead. David appeared, phone in hand. "We tried calling. You weren't answering and it was kind of last minute. You weren't using the space anyway, right?" She turned her eyes to him, measured, quiet, surgical. "Apparently neither were my boundaries." He laughed awkwardly. "It's just a few photos." Marilyn nodded once, turned on her heel and walked through the house. Inside, she didn't scream. She didn't call the police. She went to the kitchen, poured herself 2 fingers of rye, and stared out the window with the stillness of a woman who's been underestimated her whole life. She watched the photographer direct Courtney with exaggerated hand gestures. Turn your chin, perfect, and now one with the champagne glass. Hold it like power, not like brunch. Marilyn picked up her phone. She took a single photo through the glass, clean, angled, the entire tableau of violation framed perfectly. She opened her email, typed her lawyer's address into the to field, attached the image, and wrote in the subject line, "Unauthorized commercial use. My property. No theatrics. Just precision." Then she went upstairs. The house muffled the outside noise like a symphony hall with the doors closed. She sat at her bedroom desk and opened her will folder. Her hands didn't shake. David Fletcher, primary beneficiary. She hovered the mouse over the text, highlighted the line, and pressed delete. She scrolled slowly. Our cursor paused, blinking, waiting. She clicked into the line and began to type, "Beverly L. Anderson, loyal friend and caretaker." She paused, not because of hesitation, but to listen. Outside, Courtney was laughing again, but this time Marilyn didn't hear it. She heard a different voice, the one from 35 years ago saying, "Mom, I'm scared to sleep without Daddy." Her own voice had replied, "Then I'll hum you to sleep." She'd hummed every night. He'd forgotten every note. Marilyn hit save. Then she walked back downstairs, took her place on the piano bench, and tapped a single low A minor chord. The sound rolled through the house, mournful and clear. No one outside heard it, but she did. The conference room smelled like lemon polish and careful air. The blinds were half drawn, casting parallel lines across the long oak table. Outside, Asheville's trees flared with late October color, bright, untamed. Marilyn sat tall in her chair, spine unbent, hands steady. Miriam, her estate attorney of 15 years, adjusted her glasses and slid the final draft across the table. "The revised will and trust documents are ready," she said. "All you have to do is sign." Marilyn picked up the pen like she used to pick up a baton before a concert. Deliberate, certain, she read every line, every clause. She didn't flinch at the line that used to bear David's name. That name was gone now. Not erased, replaced. Primary beneficiary, Beverly L. Anderson. Secondary beneficiary, the Blue Mountain Youth Music Fund. Contingency clause, any contestation by David Fletcher results in immediate forfeiture of all assets and access. Miriam watched her. "This is final, Marilyn. Once we file, there's no quiet undoing. You're cutting him out completely." Marilyn nodded once. "David made the first cut. I'm just stitching it closed. You understand this could get public?" Marilyn uncapped the pen. "I've played through worse dissonance. This one doesn't even have a key signature." Her signature curved across the paper like a treble clef, fluid, unbroken. She passed the pages back. Miriam stamped them with a practiced hand, then slid the next folder forward. "This finalizes the trust," she said. "It covers your home, your accounts, your piano, all assets. The nonprofit is thrilled, by the way." "Good," Marilyn said, her voice soft. "Let them use it for something that matters." When they were done, Miriam leaned back and folded her hands. "Do you want to leave a personal letter for David? Sometimes closure helps, even if it's just your own." Marilyn shook her head gently. "Closure isn't handed down. It's earned. Like love." Outside the office window, a wind gust lifted yellow leaves in spirals, like confetti from some invisible celebration. Marilyn stood and adjusted the lapels of her charcoal coat. "Can I drop you somewhere?" Miriam asked. "No, thank you," Marilyn said. "I feel like walking." The walk from the lawyer's office to the jazz cafe was less than 10 minutes, but it might as well have been a procession. Each step felt lighter, as if old chains were quietly falling off her ankles. At the cafe, the doorbell chimed with a soft G note. A record played inside, Ella Fitzgerald wrapping the room in velvet. Beverly was already seated, 2 teas waiting. Her brows lifted when Marilyn walked in, smiling but unreadable. "Well?" she asked, not touching her cup. Marilyn slid the backup copy of the trust across the table. Beverly glanced at the names, the signatures, the seal. Her breath caught. "You're serious." Marilyn stirred her tea slowly. He left me behind before I ever left him anything. I just matched the energy. Beverly blinked fast. But your piano, your home. You've been more family than he's been in 10 years. You deserve a legacy, not leftovers. Beverly looked down, fighting emotion. I don't know what to say. Marilyn touched her hand. Then don't. Just be here. That's more than enough. Later that evening, at home, Marilyn changed into her robe and set a jazz record spinning. The rich hum of a saxophone curled through the living room. She poured herself a small bourbon. Neat. The same brand her husband used to sip when they sat on the porch and watched storms roll in. She stood by the fireplace, watching the flames dance, and opened her phone. There it was. David's latest post. A filtered photo of him and Courtney in matching linen outfits, wine glasses raised in a vineyard. Caption: Family is who vibes with you. Her jaw clenched. Not from pain, but from clarity. The dining room table was set like a memory Marilyn wanted to make permanent. Candles flickered in silver holders that hadn't seen use since David's wedding rehearsal dinner. The air was spiced with garlic, paprika, and the slow-cooked richness of shrimp etouffee, his favorite, one she hadn't made in years. The doorbell rang 3 minutes late, a small act, but Marilyn registered it like a downbeat off tempo. David walked in first, phone in hand. Smells great, Mom. No hug. Courtney trailed behind, lips glossed, her tone already light and dismissive. Oh my God, this house is such a vibe. You could totally Airbnb this. Marilyn smiled with grace, not warmth. Let's eat while it's hot. They sat down. The etouffee steamed in porcelain bowls. David dug in immediately. You used tarragon again. Just like college. I forgot how good this is. Courtney picked at her food with a shrimp fork like it was performance art. So what's the occasion? She asked, lifting her wine glass. It's not your birthday, right? No, Marilyn said, folding her napkin onto her lap. It's a rehearsal. David looked up, mouth half full. A rehearsal for what? For my last act, she said gently. I updated my estate plans. A beat of silence, the kind that sucks all sound from a room. Courtney giggled. As long as the house stays in the family, I say do what you need. Marilyn's gaze didn't waver. It won't. David's fork stopped midair. What do you mean? I mean the house, my piano, my investments, all of it, are no longer yours to assume. David stared at her. You're kidding. Marilyn took a slow sip of water. Number, I'm being deliberate. He set down his fork with a clink, eyes narrowing. Why would you, punish me for missing a birthday? I'm not punishing anyone, Marilyn said, her voice calm. I'm rewarding honesty. Mine. Courtney leaned back with a scoff. You've always been a bit theatrical. You're not dying. This feels like emotional manipulation. I've spent 70 years listening, Marilyn replied. If I finally raise my voice through a legal document, that's not manipulation. That's composition. David pushed his chair back. You're doing this to make a point. No, she said. I'm doing this so I don't have to make one anymore. Courtney stood, grabbing her purse. This is delusional. You're sabotaging your own family for some kind of legacy fantasy. Marilyn stood too, slowly. Courtney, you used my backyard without permission. You've spoken about me on social media without acknowledgement. And David, she turned to him, you've been absent in every way that matters. Courtney muttered, narcissist, under her breath, and walked out, heels clicking down the hallway like a timer running out. David remained seated, unmoving, jaw clenched. Marilyn walked to the sideboard and opened a folder. She pulled out a single page and slid it across the table. This, she said, is the new medical proxy. It used to have your name on it. He didn't pick it up. You're not listed anymore, she said. I've appointed someone I trust, not someone who shows up only when it serves his optics. David finally looked at her, his face tight with disbelief. You've turned into someone I don't recognize. I hope so, she said. I spent too long being someone you could overlook. She gathered their dishes, hers half-finished, David's barely touched, and carried them to the sink. The clatter of ceramic and porcelain was the only sound. David stood slowly. You've changed. I've remembered. she said over her shoulder, rinsing the plates. That's different. He lingered in the doorway a moment as if expecting her to look back, to soften. She didn't. The silence in Marilyn's house had weight. It wasn't empty. It pressed into her bones, her ribcage, the hollows of her throat. She stared at the grand piano, its surface clean but untouched, like a relic in a museum of someone else's life. The bench creaked faintly as she sat, her fingers hovering over the keys. Her breath caught. Then C, then E, then G. The first notes of the lullaby she once taught David when he was 8, eager, open-hearted, always wanting to play faster than he could read the notes. She played slowly tonight, each key a confession. The melody filled the room, swelling against walls that had once echoed with his laughter and now only remembered the absence. She closed her eyes. The sound was soft, velvet-wrapped. Each note held a weight no camera could capture, no influencer reel could replicate. She didn't play to impress. She played to remember. When she finished, her fingers rested on the final chord, not letting go. A tear slipped down her cheek, quiet, undramatic, like condensation sliding off a glass in summer. She lifted her hands, stood, and walked straight to her writing desk. She pulled out thick stationery, the kind that left a texture under your fingertips. At the top, she wrote, "To the son I once had." The words flowed easily, not angry, not begging, just true. She told him she remembered the boy who asked her to tuck sheet music under his pillow because he thought he'd dream the melody. She told him she'd spent years trying not to become bitter, only to realize that bitterness only grows where love once lived. She sealed the letter in an envelope. She didn't address it. Instead, she opened her laptop, clicked to her donation account, and transferred $10,000 to the Appalachian Music Future Fund, a scholarship for first-generation college musicians. No strings, no pomp, just potential. 3 days later, she received a message, a Zoom invitation. One of the recipients, a young woman named Tamika, wanted to say thank you. Marilyn almost declined, then clicked accept. On screen, Tamika beamed. "You have no idea what this means," she said, holding up her battered violin case. "I've been working 2 jobs and tutoring just to rent this thing. Now I can own one." Marilyn smiled, genuinely. "Make it sing," she said softly. "I will," Tamika said, "and I'll remember who helped me." After the call ended, Marilyn sat very still, the piano behind her, the screen still glowing. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. That night, while pouring chamomile tea, she idly checked her social feed. Courtney had posted again. A sleek photo, her in silk loungewear on a cream velvet couch, eyes full of feigned wisdom. Caption, "Wealth hoarders who weaponize money against family aren't protecting legacy, they're avoiding accountability." Marilyn stared at the post. No anger, no heat, just clarity. She opened a private profile she kept for her close circle and typed one simple comment beneath the post. "Wealth is only weaponized when love was bankrupt first." She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. The call came on a Tuesday morning while David was in line for espresso at a boutique cafe in downtown Asheville. His phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize, but it was local, and for a moment, his stomach dropped. "Mr. Fletcher?" the nurse asked. "We were trying to confirm that you're listed as next of kin for Marilyn Fletcher." "Yes, of course," he said quickly. "What's going on?" "Well, that's odd," she said, tapping her keyboard. "You're not actually on the medical proxy anymore. We called in error. Beverly Anderson is listed as primary with full directive authority. You might want to check in with your mother." David ended the call with a blank stare, the barista handing him his drink with forced cheer. Almond cortado with cinnamon dust? He barely nodded before walking out into the bright morning light, anger flooding in behind his ribs. Beverly? Beverly? A friend? A neighbor? A nobody in his eyes, not family. By noon, he was knocking, sharp, impatient, on Marilyn's front door. She opened it slowly, wearing her linen robe and holding a ceramic mug that read, "Keys over chaos." "David," she said, as though he were a visitor from long ago. We need to talk. Now. She stepped aside. Tea's still hot, she offered. Her voice was as calm as the birds outside. They sat in the sunroom. Light filtered through gauze curtains. Her orchids bloomed behind them. The silence felt medicinal, soothing to her, venomous to him. You changed your medical directive? He snapped. I did, she said, not even flinching. Last month? To Beverly? Seriously? She's never missed an appointment, or forgotten my birthday, or used my backyard as a content studio. He leaned forward. You're punishing me. Marilyn sipped her tea, then looked over the rim of the mug. I'm protecting myself. David ran a hand through his styled hair. How much am I getting then? I deserve to know. Without a word, Marilyn reached into the side table drawer. She pulled out a single folded paper and slid it across the wicker table. He opened it. $0 printed cleanly, centered. No fine print, no footnote. His mouth fell open, but no words came. I updated everything after your absence, she said. That chair you left empty on my birthday? That was your decision. This is mine. He let out a low laugh, one without humor. You think people won't talk? That this won't reflect on you? Marilyn nodded slowly. They might talk, but I'll still sleep well. Will you? He stood, tossing the paper back onto the table. You've lost it. No, she said softly. I've found peace. You just weren't in the room when it happened. That evening, Courtney took to Twitter, her go-to war drum. Disinheritance is the new emotional blackmail. Aging parents need regulation too. Financial abuse goes both ways. The tweet spread fast, but not in the way she'd hoped. Commenters began screenshotting her brand's past posts, tropical vacations, diamond sponsorships, a $4,000 baby stroller in a future nursery reel, even though they had no children. Replies flooded in. Didn't you just host a Gucci brunch on your MIL's lawn? Weaponizing entitlement. Impressive. Tell me you missed her birthday without telling me. By midnight, she deleted the tweet. Back in her home, Marilyn tucked her favorite shawl around her shoulders. She hummed a bar from an old Ellington tune while refilling the bird feeder outside. She didn't check social media, didn't need to. Beverly had texted her a screenshot of the backlash with a single emoji. Inside, Marilyn sat at her desk, opened a new page in her journal, and wrote a single line. Some bloodlines clot. Some bleed out. But grace doesn't beg to be inherited. Marilyn is invited on a local podcast about aging with intention. The podcast studio smelled faintly of cinnamon candles and fresh coffee, but Marilyn's hands still trembled, just slightly, as the technician clipped the mic to her blouse. Across the table, the two hosts, younger women in their 30s with soft cardigans and attentive eyes, smiled at her with an eagerness that didn't feel performative. You sure you're comfortable sharing whatever comes up? Asked Jules, the lead interviewer. We want honesty, not trauma. Marilyn adjusted the silk scarf around her neck, the one her late husband had given her the year David was born. Oh, I intend to be honest. I just don't need to bleed for it. The recording light blinked red. Welcome to Aging with Intention, where we talk reinvention, resilience, and the real stories behind what it means to grow older on your own terms, Jules began. Today, we're honored to have Marilyn Fletcher, a former jazz pianist, Asheville native, and someone we're already learning so much from. Marilyn, thank you for being here. I appreciate the invitation, Marilyn said. Her voice was calm but steady, a piano's low note held with purpose. The conversation started gently. Her music, her conservatory years, her late husband's wit, the comfort of a long-lasting home. But then Jules asked, what does legacy mean to you now? And Marilyn leaned in slightly, voice deepening. Legacy used to mean bloodlines, heirlooms, a piano passed down, a story retold at Thanksgiving. But legacy can rot if it's given to those who never earned the weight of it. The room held still. She continued. I had a son. Still do, technically. But when he started treating my life as a side plot to his, when birthdays became optional, respect became performative, and my backyard was used for content, I made a decision. I rewrote my will. I redirected every dollar toward people and causes that have shown me real gratitude, people who don't confuse access with love. Jules blinked. You're saying you disinherited your family? I'm saying I realigned my values, Marilyn said, matter of fact. People think aging means fading away, but sometimes it's clarity that sharpens with age. I stopped investing in people who only cashed in when the lights were on. No names were mentioned, but none were needed. By the time the episode ended, the air in the studio felt changed, thicker with reverence. Jules sat speechless for a moment, then simply said, "I think this conversation will change people." "I hope so," Marilyn said, "even if it's just one." The episode dropped on a Thursday. By Friday, Marilyn's inbox had to be filtered. Subject lines stacked like piano chords. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't. I stood up to my son after hearing you. Please tell Marilyn she helped me breathe again." A middle-aged nurse wrote, "I played your episode for my mom. She finally rewrote her will." An art teacher said, "I called off a wedding. Your voice cut through all my doubts." Even the mayor's office requested a transcript. Meanwhile, online, the storm Courtney had summoned with her tweet only grew darker. Listeners recognized the phrases, "content brunch," "family is who vibes with you," "emotional blackmail," and connected them to her carefully filtered posts. One sponsor dropped her skincare line. Another quietly canceled a campaign for designer handbags. The caption on Courtney's latest post read, "Truth is subjective." Comments, "So is greed." "Tell us more about that inheritance you lost." Marilyn ate this. David, as expected, left a voicemail. "You made us look ridiculous. You humiliated us. You think the world is applauding you for being some saint, but you've just exposed your own bitterness." "Congratulations," Marilyn didn't even flinch as she hit delete, then smiled. Later that week, Beverly handed her a folder of fan letters printed from the podcast's community page. One in particular stood out. A woman in Oregon wrote, "Because of you, I told my daughter no for the first time in 20 years. I thought I'd feel guilty. I felt free." Marilyn folded the letter with care, slid it into her journal, and looked out the window toward her hydrangeas, blooming unapologetically. The folder was thick, cream-colored, and embossed with gold lettering, "Advance End-of-Life Preferences, Marilyn J. Fletcher." It sat on the kitchen table like a final movement waiting to be played. Marilyn tapped it twice, then opened it. Her pen moved with practiced ease, like a musician running through the familiar cadences of an old song. Venue, small chapel overlooking the Blue Ridge. Music, a live jazz trio, no vocals, just horns, strings, and breath. Guest list, tight, friends, students, a handful of caregivers. No speeches from family, no apologies spoken too late. Beverly sat across from her, eyebrows raised. "You're not going to let him say a word?" Marilyn looked up without blinking. "Why should someone who never showed up in life get the mic in death?" She signed the line marked, "Do not announce to estranged parties." Her handwriting was steady, looping, confident. She had spent decades crafting sound with her fingers. This time, she was shaping silence. A few days later, they visited the chapel together. Sunlight filtered in through stained glass windows in soft yellows and blues, casting dappled shapes across the pews. The woman in charge, a petite, silver-haired coordinator named Lisette, walked them through the details. "There's a space here for the trio, and we'll provide fresh white roses unless you have something else in mind," Lisette said, voice gentle. Marilyn shook her head. "Number just a single lily on each seat, and a sign-in book labeled, 'For those who stayed.'" Beverly's throat tightened. "You really think he'll find out and crash it?" Marilyn's smile was small. "That would require him to remember the date." Outside, the wind stirred the oaks, their branches hushing the earth below. Marilyn took a deep breath and walked to the small garden behind the chapel. That's where she selected the memorial plaque placement. It would read, "Lived in grace, left in harmony." Back home, she knelt before the safe in her study. Inside were folders labeled neatly in blue: will, final, medical proxy, trust funds, obituary draft. The estate binder was freshly notarized. Her affairs were no longer David's concern. She'd chosen cremation. No marble, no cemetery to haunt with guilt, no headstone for performative grief. Her ashes would be scattered into the French Broad River, the same place she and her husband used to walk every Sunday after church, when David was still small and clung to both their hands like anchors. She slept better that night than she had in months. No earplugs, no sound machine, just the lull of the house breathing beside her, until the mail arrived. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive, the return address embossed with a law firm out of Charlotte. Beverly, sorting through the day's envelopes, paused and handed it over with a grim look. Marilyn opened it slowly, unfolding the legal jargon with the same calm detachment she used when sight-reading unfamiliar sheet music. Petition for reconsideration of inheritance claim. Diminished mental capacity of Ms. Marilyn Fletcher. Supporting exhibits, selected social media references and public statements. She read it again. Once for the words, again for the intent. David had weaponized her podcast, her posts, her moments of clarity, rebranded now as instability, the very testimony of her empowerment twisted into a narrative of senility. Beverly stared at her, horrified. "He's saying you're unfit?" Marilyn set the letter down with surgical precision. Not unfit, just inconvenient. She stood slowly, walked to the piano, and opened the lid. The keys were cool to the touch. She played a slow, thoughtful chord, then another, each note deliberate, measured, defiant. As the final chord resolved into silence, she whispered, "They think they can drag the tempo, but this piece is mine." The courthouse in downtown Asheville sat squat and gray beneath a sky smudged with early October clouds. It wasn't a dramatic building, nothing like the old music halls she once performed in, but today it would host one last performance. Marilyn Fletcher stepped through the metal detectors, her wool coat folded neatly over one arm, her lawyer walking beside her. Miriam Bass, sharp in a navy pantsuit, carried a briefcase fat with timelines, doctor's notes, notarized interviews, and audio files from the podcast that had set everything in motion. "You ready?" Miriam asked, pausing at the courtroom door. Marilyn inhaled once, deeply. "I've been rehearsing for 70 years. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with polite tension. A few reporters sat near the back. On the right, David and Courtney looked rehearsed too, David in a too-tight suit that made him seem more actor than son, Courtney dabbing gloss on her lips even as the bailiff called for silence. The judge, a lean woman with steel-rimmed glasses and a braid down her back, took her seat with no ceremony. "We are here today to address a petition filed by Mr. David Fletcher concerning the mental capacity of Ms. Marilyn Fletcher in regard to recent changes made to her estate." David's lawyer, a man Marilyn had never met, stood and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we present this petition not out of malice, but concern. Ms. Fletcher has exhibited erratic behavior. She's disinherited her only child, made provocative public statements, and posted online in ways that—" Miriam stood. "Objection. Vague and speculative." "Sustained," the judge said without looking up. "Stick to evidence, counselor." They presented screenshots of Marilyn's podcast quotes. Phrases like, "I cut ties to protect my peace," and "legacy is earned, not inherited," were displayed as if they were confession. Marilyn studied them all calmly. Her voice, preserved in those clips, didn't sound unwell. It sounded free. Then came the therapist's affidavit, dated, signed, thorough. It confirmed Marilyn's ongoing mental clarity, her stable emotional processing, and her deliberate decision-making. Miriam also introduced therapy session notes that showed Marilyn had been planning her estate revision long before her birthday. This wasn't spontaneous. It was structural. The judge turned toward Marilyn. "Do you wish to speak?" Marilyn rose, slow but straight-backed, her black cashmere sleeves brushing just past her wrists. She approached the podium, placed both hands gently on either side, and faced the court with the same grace she'd once used to face orchestras. "I am not confused," she began, her voice smooth, unshaken. "I am disappointed. My son is not here because I lost my mind. He's here because I found it." Murmurs stirred in the gallery. "I didn't build a life just to be treated like a brand. I didn't survive grief and solo motherhood just to have my dignity audited. I loved my son. fiercely. But love that's only returned when money is involved isn't love. It's leverage. The judge gave her a single nod, barely perceptible, but enough. The ruling came quicker than anyone expected. The court finds no sufficient evidence of diminished capacity. The petition is denied and hereby dismissed. All legal decisions made by Ms. Fletcher remain valid and binding. The gavel echoed once. Clean. Final. David stood abruptly. This is bullshit. Courtney tugged on his sleeve, but he pulled away, muttering under his breath as he stalked out. Cameras clicked. The back doors swung closed behind him. Courtney followed, phone already out, unsubscribing, unfollowing, deleting. Marilyn exhaled. The weight didn't vanish, but it did lift slightly. The weight of having to explain herself to people who never really listened. As she gathered her coat and papers, a soft voice broke through the courtroom murmur. "Ms. Fletcher?" She turned. A woman in her 20s, in a cable-knit cardigan and thick-rimmed glasses, stood with tears welled in her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you. My mother's been trying to change her will, and she's terrified of the backlash. But after hearing your story, she's not anymore." Marilyn took the young woman's hands into hers. "Then make sure she knows? Peace is something we're allowed to keep, not just give away." That night, back home in her study, Marilyn lit a single candle and opened the letter she had written to David months ago. She read every word slowly, pen in hand. Then she struck a single line through the ending. In its place, she wrote, "I loved you, but I loved me longer." The maple outside Marilyn's window had begun its slow fire. Rust red at the edges, ochre down the spine. Each leaf swayed in the stillness like a dancer considering the next step. She sat at her piano bench, untouched keys before her, a warm cup of cinnamon tea resting on the edge, and watched the leaves fall. Not rushed, not bitter, just ready. She pressed a single note, a 4, soft, clear. It hovered in the room, then faded into silence. For the first time in years, Marilyn Fletcher didn't play to prove anything. She didn't wait for someone to notice. The silence after the note didn't ache, it rested. That morning, she had made a donation to the Asheville Music Conservatory, an anonymous sum, accompanied only by a note that read, "For those who hear music before they hear doubt." No ceremony, no fanfare, just the rhythm of giving without strings. By late afternoon, Beverly appeared through the garden gate, wearing a sun hat too big for the season and holding something under her arm. "You've been busy," she called out, "but I've been sneaky." Marilyn smiled and opened the door. "You've always been the louder half of our harmony." Beverly led her to the base of the garden's back wall, where chrysanthemums bloomed wildly, sunburst yellow and soft lavender. She pulled away a bit of soil and revealed a polished plaque nestled into the stone. "Legacy lives in grace." For Marilyn Fletcher, who played louder than silence. Marilyn stood frozen, then chuckled, then blinked a little too fast. "You didn't have to." "I didn't ask for permission," Beverly cut in. "Some things are deserved without request." The next week unfolded in quiet increments: breakfast at sunrise, afternoon walks along the Biltmore trails, the scent of apples baking just because. Her body moved slower, but her spirit had never been sharper. A young music student named Hallie began coming by every Wednesday. She was eager and reverent, carrying a portable scanner and a composition notebook covered in hand-drawn treble clefs. "We'll digitize your full catalog," she'd said shyly, "so no one loses it again." One afternoon, as they sifted through an old folder labeled Lessons in C Minor, Marilyn pulled a faded scarf from a cedar drawer. It was slate blue, silk thin, and embroidered with a vine of silver notes at its edge. "My mother wore this when she played her cello," Marilyn murmured, handing it to Hallie without ceremony. "She passed it to me when I turned 20. Now I'm passing it forward." Hallie's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything that isn't written in ink." That evening, as twilight blurred the edges of the world, a plain envelope slid through the mail slot. She recognized the handwriting before she touched it. David. The paper inside was dense with ink, 3 full pages of blame masquerading as pain. He wrote of betrayal, of embarrassment, of how she'd let other people get in her head. Not once did he say sorry. Not once did he ask why. Marilyn didn't read it past the second line. She folded the pages neatly, slipped them back into the envelope, and wrote in block letters across the front, "Return to sender." The envelope sat on her hallway table as she sipped her tea. Outside, the leaves kept falling, gently, in no rush at all. The morning sun spilled across the lake like a piano's soft pedal. Muted, golden, deliberate. Marilyn's boots crunched through the gravel path as she walked slowly beside Beverly, each of them holding a thermos of spiced apple cider. No balloons, no clinking silverware, no stiff place cards or forced laughter, just breath and breeze and the quiet blessing of being seen. 71. Marilyn hadn't marked the day with anything loud. No calls had come in from David, not even a text. But that silence for the first time didn't sting. It hummed like a low note resolved. She inhaled deeply, pulling in the scent of pine, wood smoke, and cider. The autumn air held its chill like a polite reminder. Time moves whether you hold it or not. "Best birthday you've had yet," Beverly said, tapping her thermos gently against Marilyn's. "No tension, no makeup required, no Courtney." Marilyn chuckled. "No centerpiece either, except that tree that refuses to turn." "That tree's stubborn," Beverly grinned. "Just like you." They stopped at a wooden bench overlooking the water, worn down at the edges from decades of use. The lake shimmered, and the soft ripple of wind carried whispers through the reeds. Then, from a short distance behind them, a new sound, hesitant footsteps, and music. Hallie stood beside a nearby tree, holding a small electric keyboard and a portable speaker. She'd clearly practiced. Her cheeks were red from the walk, but her fingers moved with calm grace. The melody was unfamiliar, yet instantly personal. It weaved through minor chords and open intervals like a conversation Marilyn had once hoped to have, with someone who finally listened. Hallie finished the piece and offered a shy smile. "I wrote it for you. It's called Still Standing." Marilyn blinked rapidly, her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sigh. Beverly reached over and squeezed her hand. "She's good," she whispered. "She's more than good," Marilyn said. "She's free." Back at the house, there were no gifts waiting, only a small envelope from the Asheville Arts and Legacy Review. Inside, a printed clipping, "Quiet Force of the Year, Marilyn Fletcher. For a life played with grace, and a legacy that sings." Marilyn stood at the kitchen counter, the article trembling slightly in her hands. She'd been called many things over the years. Eccentric, overbearing, too much. But this title, Quiet Force, it rang true. She didn't need a stage anymore. She was the stage. Every act of boundary, every decision of dignity had composed the soundtrack of her final decades. She stepped into the sunroom and sat at her writing desk, the journal already open. She let the pen move slow and certain. "I thought I'd die with bitterness. Turns out, I'm living with clarity. No performance, just truth." The wind lifted outside, rustling the edges of the scarf tied loosely around her shoulders. Her mother's scarf, now hers alone. It danced in the current like it had somewhere to be. She rose to close the window, but paused as her phone buzzed once on the side table, a notification from Twitter. She picked it up, sighed, and read the pinned tweet at the top of her feed. "Courtney Whitmore trademark, some people weaponize boundaries and call it healing." There were no likes, no comments, no shares. Marilyn smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was almost soft, like someone who'd finally finished a hard piece of music and was listening to the silence that followed. That night, while Beverly dozed on the couch with an old Coltrane record humming in the background, Marilyn sat alone at her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad, then clicked open a video editing file. On the screen, the first frame of a short film blinked back at her. Muted colors, a woman's hands pressing piano keys, a solitary bench by a lake. Overlaid was a single line of text. "They thought I was bitter. I was composing." She whispered the title to herself. still standing, no credits, no voiceover, just music, movement, and memory. The air in the music room was thinner now, not heavy, not hollow, just clear. Marilyn sat at her writing table, fingers curled loosely around a pencil, her lined music sheet spread out in a half-moon before her. Outside the window, golden leaves skipped across the porch, catching in the corners like shy visitors. Inside, the metronome sat still, retired. She titled the first piece, one she had rewritten more than any other, Empty Chair. A delicate waltz in a minor key, it opened with a pause, 3 silent beats before the first note, like breath drawn at the edge of heartbreak. The second piece came faster, Fifth Candlestick, named for the birthday when David forgot, when Courtney's curated chaos overshadowed her aging. The melody was tight and uneven, intentionally off rhythm, capturing the imbalance of giving more than receiving. Her pencil moved with quiet certainty. Solo dinner, unsent text, ledger crossed, lake walk, each one stitched with memories, not always of pain, but always of truth. When Beverly entered with 2 mugs of peppermint tea, she stopped short at the scene. "You've written a whole life," she said softly. Marilyn nodded, "without once raising my voice." Beverly glanced at the sheet music. "Are you thinking of performing again? Even just once?" Marilyn smiled, gentle and unhurried. "I already have." They sat in warm silence for a while, the radiator hissing faintly, the scent of eucalyptus rising from the tea. Later that afternoon, the Asheville Community Garden posted a photo, a bronze plaque beneath the oak tree Marilyn had helped plant. It read, "Marilyn Fletcher Grove, where roots and rhythm endure." The post gathered hundreds of likes in a few hours. Comments poured in from former students, podcast listeners, neighbors, strangers. One simply read, "She made dignity visible." At dusk, Hallie dropped by with a manila envelope, her debut album, freshly pressed and dedicated entirely to Marilyn. The title track, "Inheritance in Silence." "I wouldn't have written any of this without you," Hallie said, her voice trembling just a little. Marilyn hugged her, felt the subtle tremble of purpose in the girl's spine. "You wrote it," she said. "I just cleared the noise." That evening, as light fell soft against the piano's lacquered lid, Marilyn's phone buzzed once. Then again. The screen read, "David Fletcher." She let it ring, and when the voicemail alert chimed, she slid the phone away, face down, unlistened. Some endings didn't need punctuation. She pulled the bench out from the piano. No audience, no microphone, just her and the final pages she'd written. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then pressed gently into a melody that rolled like breath through wind chimes. It wasn't flawless. It didn't try to be. It stumbled, recovered, and opened space between notes like a sigh between long-held words. As the last chord rang out, low and clean, the room fell into an honest, settled silence, the kind that held no ache at all. She closed the lid gently, her hands still on the polished wood. "That one," she whispered, "was for me." The light in the attorney's office slanted gold through the wide windows, catching in the frames of the diplomas and the sheen of polished walnut furniture. Marilyn sat across from Harold Klein, her longtime estate lawyer, a calm steadiness in her spine. She wore her navy shawl and a pair of earrings her mother once told her were for occasions that matter. Today, they felt exactly right. Harold adjusted his glasses. "Before we start filming, Ms. Fletcher, I'm obligated to ask, do you have any hesitations?" Marilyn looked directly at the lens of the camcorder set up on the tripod, then at Harold. "Only that I waited this long," she said. The camera's red light blinked on. She began without notes, voice smooth with practiced grace. "My name is Marilyn Fletcher. I am of sound mind and fuller heart. This is my formal testament, not just in law, but in truth." She paused, letting silence underscore the gravity. "To Beverly Anderson, my friend, my caretaker, my anchor, I leave my home, my piano, and my faith in kindness repaid." Her hands folded loosely in her lap as she continued. To Hallie Marquez, my music student and my musical heir in spirit, I leave my annotated sheet music, my savings account marked for the arts, and my story, should she ever want to tell it. She exhaled slowly, then looked into the camera lens more directly, as if speaking across time. And to my son, David, I leave no possessions. I leave no bitterness. I simply leave. You were my lesson in boundaries. I hope one day you find your own. Harold blinked hard. His legal pad was forgotten. Miss Fletcher, he murmured, you did something powerful today. She smiled, soft but certain. No, Harold, I did something permanent. Once the video file was saved and encrypted, she signed the updated document with smooth, purposeful strokes. No hesitation. She watched as Harold slid it into a fireproof envelope and placed it in her estate binder. Back at home, the garden was dappled in late afternoon sun, light warm against her skin as she walked the stone path to the back. Beverly waited by the rose bush they'd planted together years ago. Its petals were pink and defiant. I cleared a spot, Beverly said, wiping her gloves on her jeans, for the last one. Marilyn knelt beside her and pressed the soil open with her fingers. The earth was cool and damp, rich with past seasons. Beverly handed her the tiny root ball, and Marilyn cradled it into place like something sacred. What's this one called? Beverly asked. Marilyn looked up, a smirk teasing the corner of her lips. Testament. They covered the roots together, and Beverly pressed a small copper label into the soil beside it. Marilyn leaned back on her heels, brushing the dirt from her palms. Her bones ached, but her breath came easy. As they stood, Beverly asked, "Are you ready for it to all be final?" Marilyn shook her head. "Not final," she said, "just correct." Inside, she uploaded the video file to a secure cloud labeled Fletcher Estate Final. Then she locked the printed copy in her safe with her birth certificate, her journal, and the antique cameo her grandmother once wore. In the silence of her house, no ghosts stirred, no regrets whispered at the walls. Everything, finally, felt still. She stepped onto the back porch and joined Beverly by the rose bush. They stood in companionable quiet, watching shadows stretch across the garden. "You know," Marilyn said, tilting her face to the wind, "I used to think I'd be remembered for what I left behind." "And now?" Beverly asked. Marilyn's gaze fell to the garden, each bloom, each name etched in copper, each memory placed with care. "Now I know," she said. "I'll be remembered for what I kept." The lights dimmed. A hush rolled over the crowd like the first breath before a concert begins. Not noisy anticipation, but reverent stillness. The old cinema on College Street had never hosted something like this before, not a premiere, but a reckoning. The screen flickered to life, and her story began. There was no title card, no grand overture, just a black and white shot of a single chair at a dinner table, a candle flickering untouched beside a plate of shrimp étouffée. The voiceover was hers, low and deliberate. Absence is louder than grief. It fills the room, pulls up a chair, and stays. In the back row, David shifted uneasily in his seat, arms folded tightly. Courtney sat beside him, her lips pursed into a grim line, glancing nervously at the people around them. The small theater was full, artists, students, neighbors, old friends, even a few unfamiliar faces whose lives had only brushed Marilyn's in passing. But they were all here, voluntarily, quietly. On screen, a montage played. A pair of steady hands frosting a birthday cake, handwritten ledger pages with circled names, an untouched garden table glinting in the sun. The music underneath was gentle, familiar to those who knew her, a reworked solo piano line that bore the fingerprints of someone who had lived inside every note. It was hers, not a documentary, not a dramatization. It was a poem on film, filmed in silence and set to music only a heart like hers could have composed. There were no names, no accusations, but each scene landed like a verdict, a place card left untouched. A piano bench with one side worn, the other pristine. A cut to a bouquet of flowers addressed not to Mom, but to M. Courtney leaned toward David and whispered, "They'll think it's us." David's jaw flexed. He said nothing. The screen faded to a title, Final Movement. The music swelled. The student, Hallie, appeared on screen at a grand piano, fingers dancing with restrained power. The song was titled Absence as Inheritance. The screen went dark just as the final chord echoed. And then Hallie stood in the back of the theater, walked down the aisle, and took the small stage below the screen. She sat at a real piano this time, tucked into the corner like it had waited its whole life for this. One by one, she played the melodies from Marilyn's final sheet music folder: Empty Chair, Fifth Candlestick, Solo Dinner. Each piece landed like a letter read aloud. The room was full of sound and silence at once. Some people cried, others clutched each other's hands in quiet recognition. David looked down, unable to meet the screen or the music. Outside, twilight cast a lavender hue over the sidewalk as guests filed out in thoughtful silence. Beverly stood at a small table with a crate of soft-bound books, mini copies of Marilyn's compositions, printed in matte cream with no author name, just a dedication on the back, for the ones who loved quietly. People took them gently, like heirlooms. David and Courtney slipped out through the side exit, unnoticed and unacknowledged. David glanced once more at the front marquee. The sign read, One Night Only, The Final Instrument. Across town, in a craftsman home on a tree-lined street, the windows were open to the night air. A breeze lifted the curtains gently. Crickets murmured outside. Marilyn sat in her garden chair, her legs wrapped in a blanket, a glass of red wine balanced on the armrest. She could hear every note, faint and far but unmistakably hers, echoing from the theater speakers down the hill. She didn't need to be there. She had lived it all, played it all. Inside, the piano waited in stillness but not silence. The room around it glowed with presence. Legacy. Peace. She lifted her journal one final time and wrote, He skipped her birthday. She skipped his name. And never missed a beat. She closed the cover, set it gently on the table, and leaned back into the night. The garden hummed around her. The music traveled across the wind. And Marilyn Fletcher, former jazz pianist, quietly smiled, her final note still echoing long after the last key had been struck,